There was a place where raw iron became the American century, 1,100 acres of fire and will stretching along the Rouge River in Dearborn, Michigan. This was not just a factory. This was the beating heart of an empire we built with our own hands, and then abandoned when the work got hard. We let it go quiet. We let it rust. Henry Ford stood on marshland in 1917 and saw what no other man could see. Not a swamp, not floodplain. He saw the future of manufacturing stretched out before him like a promise written in smoke and steel. The other industrialists built factories that assembled parts manufactured elsewhere. Ford wanted something no one had dared imagine. He wanted earth and ore to enter one end of his empire and finished automobiles to drive out the other. Complete creation, total control, the vertical integration of the American dream itself. He bought the land for $4 million. He dredged the Rouge River deep enough for Great Lakes freighters to navigate inland from Lake Erie. He built a turning basin where ships 800 feet long could pivot and dock, their hulls heavy with iron ore from the Mesabi Range in Minnesota. This was not construction. This was conjuring. Ford was building a machine that would eat raw materials and birth the 20th century. The first building rose in 1918. Then another. The complex spread like a living organism across the floodplain. By 1928, River Rouge had become its own city. It generated its own electricity, enough to power a metropolis of 500,000 people. The powerhouse consumed coal delivered by railroad, one car every 10 minutes, day and night without ceasing. The blast furnaces burned at 2,800 degrees Fahrenheit. Stand near them and feel your skin tighten from heat that turned iron ore into molten steel that glowed like captured sunlight. The steel mill rose 6 stories high. Inside, men moved through air thick with smoke and sparks, their faces slick with sweat even in Michigan winter. They poured liquid metal into molds. They rolled steel into sheets. They forged the skeleton of modern America while their lungs filled with the taste of industry. This was hard work, brutal work, but it was work that built nations, and the men who did it understood that their labor meant something larger than a paycheck. Ford built 93 buildings across the complex, a glass plant where sand became windshields, a tire factory where rubber became the round black feet that carried America forward, a cement plant, a stamping facility, a foundry. 16 million square feet of manufacturing space connected by 100 miles of railroad track and 120 miles of conveyor belts that moved materials through the Rouge like blood through living veins. Watch a freighter arrive with iron ore and follow that ore as it becomes a fender in less than 48 hours. Magic performed with fire and precision and the sweat of men who believed in what they were building. Then came the promise that changed everything: $5 a day. When Ford announced this wage in 1914, economists said he would bankrupt himself. Factory workers elsewhere earned $2 and change for the same brutal hours. But Ford understood what the money men could not grasp. Pay a worker enough to buy what he makes, and you create not just labor, but customers. You build a middle class. You build America itself. They came in waves. Immigrants from Poland and Hungary and Italy who spoke broken English but understood the language of opportunity. Black families fleeing the terror of Jim Crow, looking for dignity through honest work. Poor whites from Appalachia and the rural South. By the 1920s, 90,000 workers poured through the gates each day. 27 different languages spoken in the cafeterias. 27 different versions of the same American dream. The $5 day meant a man could rent an apartment in Detroit, feed his family meat more than once a week, save enough to buy a Model T built by his own hands on the line where he worked. This was the engine of the 20th century turning over for the first time. This was democracy made real through wages and production. The Rouge did not just build cars, it built the American middle class, family by family, paycheck by paycheck. How did everything change after this increase? Walk through the complex in 1937 and witness industrial perfection. Raw materials flow in from one end. Finished vehicles drive out from the other. Iron ore becomes molten steel, becomes engine blocks in a choreography so precise it seems almost supernatural. Trees arrive at the sawmill and emerge 16 hours later as dashboards and floorboards. The glass plant transforms sand into curved windshields while the material is still hot enough to shimmer in the air. Every process connected, every step planned, nothing wasted. This was efficiency elevated to art. The B building alone stretched half a mile long. Stand at one end and the other disappears into haze of welding torches and grinding wheels. The noise was physical. It pressed against your chest. It rattled in your skull. It was the sound of empire being forged in real time, and it never stopped. The Rouge operated around the clock. 3 shifts. The furnaces never went cold. The assembly lines never went silent. Day and night, through depression and doubt, the Rouge kept building. The workers moved like parts of a single vast machine. They understood their role in something larger than themselves. A man might spend 8 hours a day installing the same door handle on every car that passed his station. Repetitive work, mind-numbing work. But he knew that handle would last 100,000 miles. He knew a family somewhere would depend on it. There was pride in that. There was purpose. Then the world caught fire. December 1941, Pearl Harbor burning. America thrust into a war we were not ready to fight. But we had River Rouge. Ford retooled the entire complex in months. The assembly lines that built civilian sedans started building weapons of war. The B-24 Liberator bomber. 4 engines, 10 crew members, 1,200,000. The individual parts assembled into a machine that could carry 8,000 pounds of bombs across an ocean. River Rouge built 1 Liberator every 63 minutes at peak production. Think about that. A bomber complex enough to require precision manufacturing on every component, rolling off the line faster than a man could finish lunch. The complex also produced jeeps and tanks and aircraft engines. It became the arsenal of democracy. Stalin himself admitted that without American industrial production, the Soviet Union would have fallen to Nazi Germany. And the heart of that production beat here, in Dearborn, in furnaces that never cooled. The workers understood what was at stake. Their sons were dying on beaches in Normandy and islands in the Pacific. Every rivet mattered. Every weld was personal. They worked 60 and 70-hour weeks. They worked through exhaustion. They worked through rationing and shortages and the constant fear that a telegram would arrive telling them their boy was never coming home. The Rouge ran on more than electricity and coal during those years. It ran on grief and determination and a fierce belief that American industry could win the war. And we did win. The Rouge helped us win. By 1945, the complex had produced 86,000 aircraft engines, 57,000 complete aircraft, and 4,000 tanks. Women joined the workforce in numbers never seen before. Rosie the Riveter was not just propaganda. She was real. She worked at River Rouge alongside men too old or too essential to fight overseas. Together, they transformed American manufacturing into a weapon more powerful than any bomb. The post-war years brought a different kind of glory. The factories converted back to civilian production with the same speed they had retooled for war. By 1950, River Rouge was building more cars than ever before. The returning soldiers needed vehicles. They needed homes. They needed the future they had fought to preserve. The Rouge gave it to them. New models rolled off the lines. Bigger engines, chrome trim. The optimism of victory stamped into sheet metal and rubber. The complex employed 100,000 workers at its absolute peak in the early 1950s. 100,000 families depended on the Rouge for everything. for food and shelter and education, for retirement and dignity and hope. The parking lot stretched for acres. The cafeterias served tens of thousands of meals each shift. The medical clinic treated injuries and illnesses around the clock. River Rouge was more than a factory. It was a complete society built on the foundation of making things. Everything was going well, wasn't it? But something broke in the victory. Maybe we were too tired. Maybe success made us careless. The complex kept producing after 1945. It kept employing tens of thousands. But the singular vision that created River Rouge began to fragment. Ford Motor Company started building other plants, smaller facilities, specialized factories scattered across the country and then across the world. The idea of total vertical integration, of controlling every step from raw material to finished product, began to seem old-fashioned, inefficient, too concentrated. The accountants ran their numbers. Shipping ore to Dearborn cost money. Operating blast furnaces cost money. Cheaper to buy steel from someone else. Cheaper to source components from suppliers who could bid against each other for contracts. The magic of River Rouge, the complete self-sufficiency that made it a wonder of the industrial age, became a liability in the new mathematics of global commerce. The workforce shrank. 50,000 workers, then 30,000, then fewer. Buildings that once roared with the sound of creation went quiet. The blast furnaces that never went cold for decades finally shut down in the 1980s. The powerhouse that lit a city reduced its output. Sections of the I-Dice complex stood empty, their windows broken, their floors covered in the dust of abandoned dreams. What killed River Rouge was not foreign competition, though that played a role. What killed it was not automation, though machines replaced men. What killed River Rouge was a failure of imagination. We stopped believing that making things from scratch mattered. We stopped believing that complete control of production was worth the cost. We convinced ourselves that it was smarter to outsource, to specialize, to let someone else handle the dirty work of turning ore into steel while we focused on assembly and marketing. We forgot that River Rouge represented more than efficiency. It represented sovereignty. When you control the entire process from mine to showroom, you answer to no one. You depend on no one. Your destiny is your own. But that kind of independence requires commitment. It requires investment. It requires believing that some things are worth doing even when the spreadsheet says, you could save a few dollars doing them differently. The Rouge still operates today, but it is a shadow. It builds F-Series trucks. It employs about 6,000 workers. The complex has been modernized, cleaned up, made more environmentally friendly. There is even a green roof, the largest in the world, covering 10.5 acres of the assembly building. But walk through what remains and feel the emptiness of all those silent buildings, all that abandoned potential, all those ghosts. The men who worked at River Rouge in its prime are mostly gone now. They took their stories with them, stories of heat and noise and pride, stories of building the weapons that won World War II, stories of earning enough in one factory to buy a house and raise a family and send kids to college. The American dream, forged in fire and sweat along a Michigan river. We built a cathedral of industry, and then we walked away when maintaining it got difficult. We chose short-term savings over long-term strength. We chose convenience over sovereignty. And now we wonder why manufacturing jobs disappeared. We wonder why entire communities that depended on making things with their hands have hollowed out. We wonder why we seem to have lost something essential, some core belief in our own capability. River Rouge stands as a monument to what we once were, a people who believed that if you wanted something done right, you did it yourself, a people who built the impossible and then lived inside it, a people who understood that a nation that makes things is a nation that controls its own fate. We had that once. We built it with our hands, and we let it slip away. The silence hurts most. Walk through the complex now and the quiet presses against you like a physical weight. This place once roared. It once shook the ground. It once employed 100,000 people who went home each night exhausted and proud. Now sections of it echo with emptiness. The conveyor belts have stopped. The furnaces are cold. The dream has ended. We are left with the wreckage of our own ambition. The buildings remain. The infrastructure endures. But the belief that made River Rouge possible, that faith in our ability to build and control and perfect, has faded. We told ourselves it was progress. We told ourselves it was evolution. But stand in the empty spaces where men once forged steel and ask yourself if what we gained was worth what we lost. The Rouge still makes trucks. Good trucks. But it no longer makes miracles. It no longer represents the pinnacle of human manufacturing achievement. It is simply a factory now. Efficient, modern, but no longer infinite. No longer the beating heart of anything larger than itself. We did this. We chose this. And we live now with the consequences of our choice. Perhaps we remember because remembering hurts, and the pain reminds us we once believed in something bigger than quarterly profits. We believed in building. We believed in making. We believed that a nation strong enough to turn raw earth into the machines that saved the world was a nation that could do anything. River Rouge was the proof. We built it. We made it work. And then we let it die, one closed building at a time, one laid-off worker at a time, until only the ghost remained. If you worked at River Rouge, if your father or grandfather walked through those gates, if you remember when this place represented the might of American industry, share your story. Tell us what we lost. Remind us what it felt like when we still believed we could build anything. The silence is too loud. Fill it with memory. Fill it with truth. Tell us what the infinite factory meant before we let it become finite, before we let it fade, before we forgot.